My new friend in Lima, Renato, gave a public talk about the history of Peru, and that was the first that I had really heard of Caral. Later, I realized that it also showed up in a few mentions in displays at the Museo del Oro in Bogota. Once I learned about this ancient city, I knew I had to go. As I have noted in earlier episodes, the only ancient culture of South America of which I learned in school was the Inca and Machu Picchu. But in Peru, I learned about so many other early peoples, the Nazca, the Lima, the Ica, and others, including this civilization of Caral, which built what is considered the oldest city in the Americas. Caral is about 5,000 years old and predates the Inca by about 4,000 years. Machu Picchu is pitched in ads all over Lima, but it soon became apparent that I would not have enough time left on my 90-day Peru visa to get to that famed mountaintop. Those trips book up months in advance, and getting there and back through Cusco takes days. The trip to Caral could be done in one day and booked a day in advance. It's only about a 2.5-hour drive from Lima, although with traffic it took us well over an hour just to get out of Lima, making it 4 hours each way and 4 hours back, making for a day that started at 5 in the morning and ended at 8 at night. I shared the trip with some nice people, a couple from Veracruz, Mexico, and a man from Madrid. The tour guide was nice enough to repeat everything in English just for me, since my Spanish is less than perfect. Caral was rediscovered in 1905, but no one really did anything about it until 1994, when a Peruvian archaeologist named Ruth Shady Solis began work in Caral. I wonder if Ruth Shady's son was the real Slim Shady. Sorry, I couldn't resist the bad joke for you Eminem fans. Dr. Shady and her students did extensive work to uncover parts of Caral, but there was a great deal more to discover. Displays document the timeline of rediscovery, and every year they celebrate the anniversary of that day in 1994. Since then, a total of 25 sites have been found, only 3 of which are open to the public. Most are not yet investigated. The blue and white signs mark the location of other archaeological sites, some of which we could see from the road, but which were difficult to photograph from the van bumping along at a pretty good speed. Each of these marked mountains are known to contain pyramids or other buried archaeological treasures. Machu Picchu was rediscovered in 1911, so there's been time to uncover and document most of it. It has an 83-year head start on Caral, so much more needs to be done to find all that lies beneath the soil here. Caral is so much easier to get to than Machu Picchu, but it's not on most people's radar in terms of history or tourist attractions. There's a small museum containing a few items found at the site, but there will be lots more to uncover, and more space will be needed to properly display all the finds. The parking lot was almost empty when we arrived, although 2 buses of school students and another van full of tourists arrived while we were there. As research and exploration continue, there are sure to be many more sites uncovered. Among other things, they're missing a cemetery. Caral alone is estimated to have had 3,500 to 6,000 people at any given time over hundreds of years, but only a few bodies have been found, ones with special significance. A boy buried with beads and other adornments, along with the fact that he was laid to rest at one of the pyramids, denote his apparent high status, and a man about 20 years old whose body was found naked with his wrists and ankles tied and his head bashed in, either as a sacrifice or he was killed as punishment for a crime, and he was also buried in a pyramid. Human sacrifice was not uncommon in this culture, especially in times of drought. They know there were years of bad harvest due to emaciated corpses being found. These people from all of these towns may have abandoned the area and moved away after an especially bad drought or several years of crop failure, but no one knows where or why they went or if their descendants are still in the area. The terrain also shows signs of flooding and mudslides, perhaps the results of serious El Niño weather patterns for a few years. It is theorized that human sacrifice was performed to appease the gods in those drought years. You wonder how many people were killed before they realized it really wasn't changing the weather. Indeed, there is flooding. Twice we had to drive into the river and back out again, as well as drive across a few smaller streams, which have varying amounts of water in them. If the water had been any higher, we would not have been able to cross and would have to drive about an hour around the stream. The early Caral residents grew crops in what is still to this day a very fertile valley. Traces of many of these crops have been found indicating that they have been grown here for millennia. Corn, sugarcane, passion fruit, peppers, paprika, and many others fill fields all along the valley. Storage bins at Caral had seeds and fibers left in them from days when they were in use. There were circular seating areas that showed signs they had been used for musical performances. There was one of these outdoor arenas for each of the classes of people, the wealthier neighborhood and the poor area, but at least they all had music. In a few Peruvian cities, I had seen outdoor music venues where people performed and danced at no cost to anyone, and I wondered if this tradition has actually been carried on for all of these millennia. The standing stones were different than the local rocks and granite and apparently had come from hundreds of miles away in the Andes. These Caral people do not seem to have had the wheel, so it would have been an incredible amount of work to bring them here. This one seems to be aligned to parallel the mountain ridges behind it. It acted as a sundial, and the paths leading away from the stone go in each of the 4 cardinal directions. Clearly, these people had knowledge of the position of the sun, and some lines and pyramids pointed to summer solstices, which here in the southern hemisphere is December 21st. For people so dependent on a good harvest, knowing the best time to plant crops had to be important. And these stones placed in front of the steps at each of the pyramids were also quite large, too heavy for even 2 men to carry, so it is a marvel that they could transport these stones hundreds of kilometers from where they originated. The rope-bound rock bundles were their solution to the frequent earthquakes in the areas. The rocks would shift slightly but stay together in these rope nets, and the buildings wouldn't collapse. Their solution was simple and ingenious, like the vertically stacked adobe bricks I had seen at Huacapucana. I asked about the black flags flying from some of the pyramids and walls, and our guide told me that they were essentially scarecrows. Their flapping was meant to deter birds from visiting these ancient structures and depositing guano, the acids in which can speed up the decay of the structures. And there were plenty of birds around, but I didn't see any on the buildings, so I guess the flags work. There was also a spiral done in rocks. I wondered about the connection to the spiral in Nazca, if there was one, or it was just a coincidence. When I got to Caral, there were only 2 cars in the parking lot. By the time we left, a few other groups, including a school group, had arrived, but most of the time we had the site to ourselves. Admission to the site was included in the tour fare, $130 US, and includes a local tour guide each of the groups is required to have. Our local guide never said anything because our van guide did all the talking, but we were still required to have the local guide along. I don't know how much the admission/guide price were, since that was all part of the price in my trip. The trip was a little expensive, but since I was not going to make the Machu Picchu on this trip, I wanted to go. And since I only had a week left in Peru, I was trying to cram in a lot of things. There were a few people working to excavate more of the site, but so few compared to the vast size of the area that unless more resources are brought in, it'll be a very long time before more of the site is revealed. One period has been left only partially uncovered to show visitors what things looked like before work began. It was an interesting visit, and I'm glad I got to explore more of Peru's ancient history and to learn that there is so much more to uncover. It's a shame that the country doesn't have the resources to fully investigate and promote these places. On the drive away from the site, our guide pointed out other sites that have barely been touched by modern investigations, and there's so much more to be done at the 22 other known sites and the many more that are sure to be discovered if they only had the time and resources. I will have more to say about this when we visit some other ancient sites near Nazca. After the visit to Caral, we stopped for a nice lunch in the seaside town of Barranca, not to be confused with Barranco, a neighborhood of Lima I had been to numerous times. And then we paid a quick visit to Barranca's giant statue of Christ before heading back to Lima. It was a nice view from the top of the hill on which Christ stands. Subscribe so you can come along as I continue to explore South America and recount past adventures in the US and Europe.